Hi, everybody. I'm Addison Snell with Intersect 360 Research, and I am delighted to be back here at this conference. I absolutely love it. I like these vertical-specific conferences where we really get a focus on what the applications are and the problems that we're trying to solve. I will be the least technical of all of the technical talks, but I am bringing in some big questions that we see in the market research side at Intersect 360 Research. We're industry analysts who focus on high-performance markets, specifically HPC and AI. And this talk is a new talk for me, so hopefully I won't be like too dramatically over time. I'll do the best I can. But it's based on an editorial I published recently in HPC Wire, the premise of which was that we came out of 2024, and on the one hand, it felt like the industry was really riding high. We had a new #1 on the top 500 list, had multiple exaflops, the market is booming, we had record attendance, and yet there's this undercurrent that everything somehow still feels really unstable. And some of that has to do with AI, and some of it has to do with government and industry change and the market dynamics. And that's really what's behind these 5 big questions. This is just introducing us here. I am going to mention our HPC-AI leadership organization, which Dan was very kind to plug at the end of his talk. And I'm mentioning it because this is really the driving force behind a lot of our market research now, where we have a new global end user group with independent advisory committees, Dan, in 3 different regions: Americas, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and Asia Pacific. Dan Stanzione, who just spoke before lunch, is the chair of the Americas group. Elizabeth, who just introduced me, is on that advisory committee. We'll be adding a lot of names to the Asia Pacific Advisory Committee when we get to the SC Asia conference in a couple of weeks in Singapore. These advisory committee members helped identify through interviews with them what some of the top issues they saw facing HPC and AI, and this is driving our research agenda going forward for this year, including the overlap of HPC and AI. What's HPC? What's AI? Talent development, I think, is something we're going to have to come back to in this conference. It's not going to be something I'm focusing on this talk here. Where are AI and LLMs applicable in HPC, et cetera? Sustainability. And that's informed our research agenda. There's a budget survey that's in the field right now. We'll get into a series of state-of-the-market reports that, if I'm fast enough, I'll have a chance to describe by the end of this talk. We're going to do more segmentation around AI and hyperscale and the rest of the market. And this is how you join us. You can hit that QR code. Now, Dan gave a great plug for everybody to go join the advisory committee. This might be on auto advance because I pulled it from a different thing, so I'm going to keep pushing it back if it does that. If you're a vendor of HPC AI technologies, go ahead and apply and you'll get rejected. That's what's going to happen with that. This is strictly an end user organization right now, and that's because it's this group that's really driving our research going forward. We will ask you to fill out surveys from time to time, but the benefit of that is we're going to plow that research back through the user community. You're going to get a voice in helping to steer the direction of things. If you're something in between, like a consultant or something like that, you can apply. You'll probably also get rejected. We're really trying to keep this strictly clean on HPC and AI user organization for right now. We'll have more for vendors after we really get this established, but this has a huge benefit on the market research side, where we can now say, here's this group of HPC and AI users worldwide, and what they're saying is important in the industry right now. I mentioned the budget survey that's in the field right now. I'm going to make reference to that as I go into big question #1, which is, how big can the AI market get, right? This has already, I would say, gone beyond our expectations and forecasts as analysts from a few years ago. We probably had it closer than anybody else, and we were way low on where this was going to go. Now, we say AI market here because people keep asking us about the AI market. We often refer to the HPC and AI market. And that's because if you go outside the hyperscale community, the big hyperscale companies, those are the ones who are really doing pure AI and not a lot of HPC for their purposes. Outside of that, if you're doing on-premises AI, you're probably also doing HPC. The people who are doing on-premises AI outside of hyperscale are generally organizations that are also doing HPC, and maybe the fact that they have experience with HPC lends them to that decision to also do AI. Now we're seeing, we did a mid-2024 update. We have not done a final 2024 numbers yet on the year. We reforecasted in November because at this point in the year, in February, not all the primary vendors have even reported their final end of year numbers yet. We generally don't get that done till mid-April at the soonest. So this time of year is kind of awkward, but it's going to be way up. When we look at the hyperscale companies, which we segment out, they're now spending, the top ones, in excess, as Dan was saying, in excess of tens of billions of dollars per year on AI infrastructure. Think about that in relation to something like a major DOE supercomputer, where it might cost hundreds of millions of dollars for a single supercomputer. This is 2 orders of magnitude more than that for a single hyperscale company per year going into their AI infrastructure. And there are multiple companies doing that at the top level. And on-premises AI is taking off, but most of it is in that hyperscale space. We track different vendors as part of this. We do some supplier analysis. This is NVIDIA's data center market. This isn't us doing this. This is just right off of their quarterly reports, right? You can read it. Now, where the hash marks are for the different years, we try to convert their fiscal years into calendar years. NVIDIA is one of these really annoying companies that doesn't line up quarter by quarter. It kind of splits in mid-quarter, so we have to do our best to estimate. But you can see this huge growth taking off. Now, it is interesting because what looks like linear growth going up to the right, that means quarter over quarter, the percent gain is getting a little less each year. So we do think there's an asymptote out there somewhere. But we also, most of the leading vendors were tracking to 75, 150% growth. Does that mean that the on-premises market was doing all that? Well, even with HPE and Dell, we saw that. And we realized, no, HPE and Dell each had major hyperscale sales in the course of the year, competing with the Lenovos and Supermicros that are more of a hybrid OEM, ODM model. So we have to build all of that in. We do try to look at HPC and AI budgets. This is the previous year's data. With the current budget surveys are in the field now. People tell us what did their budgets do last year, what are they doing this year, what's the expectation going forward, how much is HPC, how much is AI. If you can tell us roughly what percent is servers or storage or personnel or facilities, please join Halo, take that survey now. It really helps guide our research going forward. And we do not identify any respondents with their data. And we've been doing this for almost 20 years at Intersect 360 Research. We've never leaked that out. That would kill us as analysts. So really, we only present the data in the aggregate. And that goes into forecasts like this, where we did add $16.5 billion to the on-premises HPC AI forecast. And a lot of that had to do with the influence of AI, and people are spending more money on GPUs. The biggest part of the difference is forecast for this year in 2025, as we see a lot more of those GPU systems that maybe they were supply constrained in 2024. Dan was talking about their system coming in this year. That's where we're going to see a little bit more of a bump. But that much of a bump, that would be the big story in most years, that we added that much into the forecast. But no, this is what's going on the hyperscale side. The part I just showed you is the darker blue on the bottom. The lighter blue on the top is what hyperscale companies are spending on AI going back to 2022. 2023, 24 here is still technically a forecast. We reforecast that in November. If anything, it's low, and we try to be conservative in our forecasts and not overshoot. But 24, 25, they're up there. Why it went over our forecast, not least of which is that Twitter jumped in to become a top-tier I mean, the conglomeration of Twitter, X, XAI, SpaceX, that whole thing kind of made, mostly through XAI, made the jump into being a tier 1 hyperscale spender where they'd previously been kind of a tier below that. But that's another company that's now going up into that tens of billions of dollars per year range. That's what's dwarfing what's going on here. Now, what's interesting is that hyperscale still is not the dominant conversation that they want to sell us on. What we keep hearing about is enterprise AI, right? Most of this is consumer spending. This is AI for things like Instagram and YouTube and getting a new filter on something on your WeChat, or even how consumers play with ChatGPT is the bigger part of the AI market. Think of it like with cloud, right? Cloud took off, and it did. But all of that spending, it's not because enterprises wanted to spend more money on enterprise computing. In fact, for all the cloud adoption it was supposed to be saving me money, not increasing money. Where a lot of the huge cloud growth came from was a consumer segment, because things that didn't used to be data center markets became data center markets. My music didn't used to be a data center market, and now it is. My video streaming, video games, social media was not a previous construct. There are maps, email, your contacts, your calendar, how much is in the cloud from a consumer side that just wasn't a data center market? That was the growth part of the market, and a lot of that is happening with AI too. When we look at the budgets outside of that, and this is what's going on now, we found last year that when we contacted large enterprises, 264 total contacts, 95% had HPC or AI budgets. Out of those, there were 10% who had HPC and no AI. There were 11% who had AI and no HPC, and the other 80% was overlapping in the middle. They had both. And then we could track, okay, is it mostly HPC? Is it mostly AI? Are they always together? Are they always separate? Where are they? This data is currently in the field now also. What's really going to go away is the people who are doing HPC only and no AI. And it's not because they're not doing HPC, it's that they're adopting more AI. And that part's going to shrink. And we're tracking that as part of our budget forecasting. But when we get into this enterprise AI opportunity and how much money there is there, how much money am I supposed to make from enterprise AI? And this is really a big question here, because I think fundamentally these are bound if we try to follow the money. Because there's two ways that I can make more money if I'm going to be a profitable organization. One is I can bring more money in, and two is I can spend less. It's kind of, those are the two ways to do it. Most of the focus, I think, has been on the second part, the spending less idea. AI is somehow going to make me more operationally efficient, or maybe it's going to replace my employees. Let's face it, I'm going to get to lay off a bunch of people and do it with AI instead. But that has a bound to it, right? How much money are you willing to spend to save $100, right? Even if you annualize it and say $100 per year, how much money are you willing to spend to save $100 per year? You can bracket it. And then it has diminishing returns beyond that, because even if I spend $1 million to save $2 million, it's hard to repeat the trick and say, well, I want to spend another million and save another $2 million, and another million, and it doesn't work like that, right? So there's some kind of bound to how much money I can spend in order to save. And then there's increasing revenue, but this one I think is also a trap. Now there's two types of increasing revenue. One is making the whole market bigger. That's called primary demand stimulation. There's more people spending money on something. The more common one is secondary market, which is I take share from my competitor, right? Now, making the whole market bigger, again, that's kind of dubious to me. Because the airlines start using AI, more people take flights or spend money on plane. I mean, do people have more money overall? That's a tough sell for me there, that you're going to increase the overall revenue of the industry. There are probably some use cases where that's true. I think more likely you're looking at secondary, and you're going to say, well, my chatbot is better than your chatbot, so I'm going to take sales from you. I guess that's possible. Look at the World Wide Web taking off. Amazon starts selling books. Barnes & Noble and Borders don't respond by putting up a big web presence, and Amazon takes all the share. Did people buy more books as a result? Did they read more? Maybe a little, but I mean, the idea you made it easier to buy books so people read more is tough. Mostly, I would say, if Borders and Barnes & Noble had been quick and responded, then you'd get, a battle over it, and then this becomes a zero-sum game. And if everybody does it, it creates the prisoner's dilemma scenario where everybody spends more money to have the same market share that they had before. But you have to do it because if your competitor does it and you don't, you lose the share to them. So this is kind of how we look at the enterprise AI opportunity. There are real boundaries to how big that can get, but it's not slowing down hyperscale because most of their business is actually consumer, not enterprise. Which brings up the second big question, is hyperscale going to completely take over enterprise computing with all of this spending? When we look at cloud penetration in HPC and AI, now there were similar Hyperion numbers up in Dan's talk. We have a much higher cloud penetration than Hyperion does. I don't know what we're counting that they're not. But regardless of that, we see the penetration of cloud. It's been nearing an asymptote according to the demand side of where things are going. And that's not because of any deficiency in cloud. It mostly is, again, an economic reason that if you can have a reasonable efficiency percentage on your HPC deployment, it becomes cheaper to buy it than to rent it. Right? Cloud does really well if you have variable demand or spikes or if you want to sandbox new technologies. There are a lot of great use cases for that. But if you look at the blue part at the bottom, that's the on-premises server spend. The dark orange second from the top is the cloud spend. They're getting close to equal, but the cloud is kind of evening out in terms of how much spending there is there relative to everything else. And even when we look at things like LLMs in our research, on the demand side, people are telling us they mostly want this stuff on premises. They would like control over these resources and the spending. The problem is, what if cloud starts to become the only choice? Because the amount of demand that we were seeing on that hyperscale side is such that if suppliers are prioritizing all of the deliveries to cloud and on-premises gets constrained, and I want to try something on the newest Blackwell or whatever, right, cloud might be the only choice. And if that starts putting pressure on the supply side, it gets harder for the traditional server OEMs to compete a smaller market. This really is at very near a tipping point right now, where we already have been forecasting a negative growth rate on the entry-level HPC portion of the market, the smaller systems. And that's because the new people coming into the market who don't eat up as much resources are more likely to go cloud. Cloud displaces small systems more than it displaces large systems. It's the first time we ever had any segment of our market go negative on a long-term growth forecast, and it's in that entry-level portion of the HPC market. If that starts taking more of the momentum away and it's harder for HPE, Dell, Evident, Fujitsu, whoever you like, to go compete that, that can snowball really quickly, and the server vendors start thinking, okay, well, we have to serve hyperscale and not the on-premises portion. This is the amount of power that they have right now. Over 3/4 of data center spending worldwide right now is going to hyperscale companies. Over 3/4 of it. And that's a relatively few number of companies. And they build these out hundreds of megawatts, even gigawatts at a time, as Dan said in his talk, with the technology vendors prioritizing deliveries there. This dynamic caused us to write 5 years ago in a hyperscale sizing report. That's a report that we published in 2019. You read the paragraph that we wrote there, that it's not slowing down in the next few years. It didn't. I'll take points for that. Such market power is not unprecedented in the world's economic history, but has not been previously seen at this level in the information technology era. Right? When you get major world governments trying to curry favor with individual companies, the natural world order is upside down. And historically, it doesn't last. although it's hard to say exactly what will topple it. And the current political climate actually supports it because we're trending more toward notions of HPC and AI nationalism, and my HPC and AI is bigger than your HPC and AI, and it wants to support more of that national hyperscale infrastructure, which brings up big question number 3, what effect is the new US administration going to have on HPC and AI? This is a touchy topic, especially to come anywhere and present in front of a mixed group from all over and keep anyone's personal politics out of it, right? This isn't about how anyone should or shouldn't vote, but it's my job as an analyst to look at questions like that and say, what do we think the effect is going to be? I was in Barcelona on Inauguration Day, on Martin Luther King Day. It wasn't a day off for me because I was at the High Peak Conference, and all of the Europeans were asking me, as the American at the dinner table, what I thought as all of this avalanche of executive orders were coming out. It's been really strange to watch. And I don't have as much market research on this, but both our Halo organization and that High Peak Conference both highlighted issues around HPC and AI nationalism as issues that are major threats to progress because they reduce collaboration on the global scale. The very first day he was in, Donald Trump joined the announcement of this Stargate project, which is going to be a $500 billion announcement supporting American AI data centers, mostly fronted by OpenAI, but with a host of other organizations behind it. That was an interesting one because, all right, great. Obviously, this was already in the works since, before Inauguration Day. So it's hard to give the Trump administration credit for making it happen. You might give the Trump administration credit for creating an environment that kept the data centers and the relevant jobs in the United States. You can certainly credit them for deregulation that's going to enable a lot of energy production to go into these data centers. And in fact, during that announcement, that was exactly what President Trump alluded to, is he said, we're going to deregulate this and make it easier for everyone to generate the energy at their own data centers to go do this. But then there's the next question of what does national leadership in AI or HPC mean? Because it's a little different in different parts of the world. Europe is really focused, I would say, on public sector funding and a lot of collaboration, right? They look at what their national labs are doing. China is an interesting model of state-sponsored capitalism. It's inherently capitalistic, but it is controlled and monitored by the state. So China, in a sense, owns it. When we look at the United States and these companies, we're talking about global multinational companies that are headquartered in the United States, but they're not owned by the US government. So to say, well, America leads, well, they're American companies, but they also sell globally, right? And in fact, the executive vice president of government, government affairs or something like that of NVIDIA, blasted the Biden administration in its final days for its AI diffusion rules and said this is a regulatory morass that cannot stand. And you should care what NVIDIA thinks here. They didn't want to have their technology fettered as it goes around the globe. But that gives the Trump administration kind of a tricky needle to thread because on the one hand, they want to promote the use of American technology, but then if they get used globally, right, well then is it really American leadership or is it fueling leadership somewhere else? So there's a question there. And in fact, of the companies that were funding the Stargate project, one of them is SoftBank, which is not an American company, that's Japanese. The other is a brand new company in the UAE that was just funded by the Emirati government last year, right? Those are two of the main funders of Stargate. So is it an American project or not? That's kind of the question. And then in the bottom here, do people recognize that logo? With the star, that's the logo for the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, under Elon Musk, or it either is or isn't under Elon Musk, depending on whom you ask on which day. I guess legally it isn't, but in practice it is. And he's taking on government spending across I mean, everywhere, the government, right? And this is, again, isn't meant to be a political statement. I think everybody on both sides would agree that this is an unconventional administration. It is the rare anti-government government, right? The whole point is to reduce the size of federal government spending, and they're slashing it in a lot of ways that are having a very real effect. And that could be seen in the Department of Energy, the NIH, NASA, NOAA, NSF, whatever. And this is so when did it become my job to predict what Elon Musk would advise Donald Trump to do and to what extent Donald Trump would listen? And yet that seems to be what I'm faced with here. The idea that, so Elon Musk, A, his job is to get rid of government spending, but B, he's a huge fan of AI and technology. So what's the effect of that? When we look at announcements like, you know, Google and Microsoft saying they can do these long-range weather forecasts as an example, that was in the news recently, is it a foreseeable possibility that something like NOAA, the Department of Government Efficiency, would say we don't need that anymore, and we're going to have a private sector cloud contract instead that goes to XAI or to Azure or to Amazon or to whoever, right? That is now a reasonable possibility that we have to consider. What about NASA and SpaceX? Same question, right? And you know, we're only a month into this administration, but in general, I think the deregulation and the support of technology and this idea of American exceptionalism should, in this country anyway, boost commercial spending on HPC and AI, particularly in areas like energy, finance, perhaps pharmaceuticals, but that depends on a lot of public sector research as well. But then there's the question of what happens with public sector spending on the other end. It's going to be very disruptive. But the presentation's called 5 Big Questions, not answers, so it just gets to be a question. I said you get to care what NVIDIA thinks because NVIDIA is the one that's on top of everything in AI right now. They're completely dominant across all of this, and there's the question of whether anyone can challenge them. And we've got loads of market research data on this in terms of people adopting more nodes. This is on the HPC-AI side. How much is NVIDIA? The most interesting chart on this is the top left one, that little simple looking histogram of accelerators per node in HPC-AI outside of hyperscale, where that's been drifting up over the last couple years. And for the last few surveys, 4 has been the most common number in terms of accelerators per node. That's a weird number because it's kind of this dirty compromise, right? 4 GPUs per node is too many GPUs for a lot of your traditional HPC applications, and it's not enough for a lot of your new AI applications. So what you did is you picked the compromise that everybody's going to hate the same, right? And I don't know how stable that is either. I think in the longer run, we start seeing a divergence here of more HPC-focused nodes and more AI-focused nodes, which is how they did the Mare Nostrum 5 at Barcelona. They've got some that are no accelerators and some that are lots of accelerators, right? Rather than have the same go across everything. So when we look at the potential challengers, we tend to start by thinking of the conventional ones, and those would be Intel and AMD at the top. Intel, you know, don't think Intel didn't see this coming, right? It's not like Intel wasn't caught entirely by surprise. Intel has been trying to launch a GPU for more than a decade now, ever since the Larrabee project in the early CUDA days. And then Larrabee didn't succeed, and Intel pivoted to many integrated core. Many integrated core became Intel Xeon Phi. Intel Xeon Phi they tried as a coprocessor and as a standalone processor. That gave way to the more GPU-focused things, the most recent one of which was Ponte Vecchio, which got branded Intel Max. Ponte Vecchio didn't succeed in the market, got yanked. We were supposed to wait for which one was first? Falcon Shores, Jaguar Shores. They've yanked Falcon Shores. Now we're waiting for Jaguar Shores. Gaudi is in the market as an inferencing product, but has not taken anything, a bite out of NVIDIA yet. Intel has more or less tried and not succeeded to come out with a GPU that would compete with NVIDIA. It turns out it's hard. I think Intel in this space gets tons of credit for succeeding in the x86 environment, where they've done lots to continue to succeed with that. But everything outside of that hasn't really taken off. I'm getting the warning here. It started late, though. There are any number of startups here. I think the more interesting new paradigm is, as NVIDIA continues to vertically integrate into networking, into whole systems, the more interesting thing is that they're now competing with their own cloud companies who are customers as vendors in this space by investing in GPU-focused AI clouds. And all of the hyperscale companies are also designing their own processors. So the real paradigm shift isn't NVIDIA versus Intel, it's NVIDIA versus AWS or Azure, though I think by the end of the decade, that's more likely. And then what Dan was getting at is question 5, which is what about good old HPC? Because HPC wants all of this precision. We're still looking at 64-bit precision as the dominant one that people are using, that people say they want. And AI is dragging a lot of these roadmaps away from that. I guess I would give a lot of credit to Next Silicon for being a vendor that's out there that's really focused on the HPC space and 64-bit. But we're not seeing a lot of that there. And when we look at the architectures that people say they want for their applications, mostly what we see is people want x86 plus NVIDIA GPUs, but that's not the way the market's evolving, because everything's integrating into all Intel, all AMD, all NVIDIA. NVIDIA is taking the GPUs and going ARM. Intel doesn't have the GPU yet. AMD is there, but doesn't have the software ecosystem yet. So a lot of this is going to give. We're seeing all the changes in programming languages where Python is now dominant. All right, well, what's the applicability of Python coming into HPC? And here's the last thing that Dan was starting to get at, is that we've actually been here before, though, right? When we went from vector to scalar, or went from SMP to cluster. This is everything that we would hear, right? That's not HPC. That can't do real problems. Oh, sure, it's lots of flops, but your application won't succeed. In fact, IDC, where I worked for a time, had a whole rift in their market methodology between capability HPC and capacity HPC, and clusters weren't for real. We got over it, right? Everyone went to clusters eventually. It won. And that's exactly what Dan was just talking about, that eventually if you have a new dominant hardware paradigm, it's up to HPC to start to adapt. We are going to do a series of HPC state of the market reports in all of these different domains. This will include inputs from key suppliers as part of everything that we're doing here. The suppliers who are top in the area will be invited. And this is not pay to play. This isn't like someone has to give me $5,000 to be in the report. If they're one of the top suppliers, they'll get to conform to the same word count and image count as anyone else and go in and map that against what users are saying they need and how satisfied they are in terms of all of these different areas. That gap analysis between what people are getting and what they want is always fun. We're going to be coming out with these all summer. That's the summary. If you're an end user, please join Halo. Thank you very much.
Nicely done. I'm going to allow half a question while we key up the next speaker.
Hey, Doug.
I have to wonder about the economics of what you were saying with some of the Dells and the others who start to just cater to the hyperscalers. It feels to me a little bit like almost what some of the American automakers did when they had to sell to all the big, the fleet sales to the rental car companies. They sold a lot of stuff, and the profits went way down. And they kind of had to back away from that. Maybe that's a similar trend.
Yeah, what's the economic model for a big traditional server OEM is essentially the question. Because the fastest growing vendors in this space recently have been Lenovo and Supermicro. Well, plus NVIDIA, of course, which is selling complete systems. But Supermicro and Lenovo have what you could call a hybrid ODM OEM model where they can operate like a Foxconn or a Quanta that does hyperscale styles of sales. I think that the challenge is really most acute for a company like Dell, which is trapped between HPE and the high-end services at the top and the lower cost ODM influenced model at the bottom. I think if you're Dell, you really have to be faced with which of these do you want to be and get firmly into one camp or the other. So yeah, what's the economic model going to be like for them? That's the huge question right now. Appreciate the question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.